everyone, today in this video I am going to be talking about why autistic people can sometimes seem rude. And I'm making this video because autistic people are often extremely misunderstood and people may believe that people are rude or insensitive when actually someone is just doing what they can to socialise with others and don't mean to cause any harm or offence. I hope that by explaining the viewpoint that some autistic people have, others can sort of understand more and be a little bit more compassionate rather than accusing autistic people of just being rude. So I think the first thing to say is that autistic people sometimes struggle to see other people's point of view. So when we voice our opinion on something in a conversation, it may be insensitive to another person who has had a different life experience, as we can't really see things from their experience. It's a struggle to put ourselves in others' shoes and imagine what it would be like to be someone else or to have lived their life. So sometimes we may say things that may be offensive to people who have different experiences simply because we struggle to see their own perspective. So we may focus on one aspect of a topic that we have experienced and that we are aware of, forgetting the bigger picture, the other factors that come into that topic. So we might base our opinions on only what we've experienced because we struggle to see other points of view, and to some people that can seem quite offensive, but it's unintentional. We just do struggle to see things from others' point of view, so understandably our views and opinions on things might seem a little bit insensitive, but that's just because we don't know what it's like to be any different to others. We base things on our own experience because we don't understand what it's like for others. It's said that autistic people are more egocentric than most people, and that does not mean that someone thinks they're better than other people. That's definitely not what it means. In terms of autism, being egocentric does simply mean that we struggle to see things from others' point of view. I guess that's because we aren't fully people-oriented, and when you see another person's point of view, it's a very social thing, but autism is primarily a social communication and social interaction difficulty, so I guess that's why. Sometimes we may say things that seem insensitive because we just can't see how it's perceived by others. All that makes sense to us in our mind is what something means to us. If we say something, we can only see our perspective, and to us it seems valid, but if we say it out loud, other people might be really offended, and we may be surprised that they're offended because we did not see that coming. We can't think about the consequences of what we say because we just can't see another point of view until other people react in a certain way. Sometimes we might be quite uncertain of ourselves because we're so used to sometimes people getting offended by us when we don't mean to offend people. So we might sometimes hesitate to say things because we don't know if they're offensive or not. And sometimes people might think we're offensive because we might be a little bit blunt and straight to the point. So we might just say how we're feeling in a way that is a little bit confrontational or is a little bit just blunt. For example, it's always good to voice how you feel, by the way. I am just saying that for an autistic person, we might put it really bluntly, rather than, I guess, saying it in a way that's unlikely to upset others. For example, if someone is calling you, an autistic person may not want to answer and they may message back, talking to you feels like a chore, so I don't want to talk right now, and that would probably be perceived as really offensive to the other person, but the autistic person's just trying to say that they're tired and they don't want to call right now. So the way we say things can sometimes seem quite insensitive, but we don't necessarily mean it that way. We're just trying to express how we feel. And again, there's another thing. Autistic people are often said to be very brutally honest. We don't really lie that much. It can be quite difficult to lie. And people may not really get why people lie. So if someone says to a neurotypical, "Does this dress make my bum look big?" most people would say, "Oh no, it doesn't," because they are trying to be kind. It's a white lie potentially. But for an autistic person, they might just say yes because we're very honest. We'll just say what we're thinking. That happens, and other people can perceive that as quite offensive, but again, we don't mean it. It's a big autism thing. I guess because of the rigid ways of thinking that some autistic people have, we sometimes have black and white thinking where it's either this or that and no in between. We might get into more arguments than the average person potentially because we might take things that people say too literally. For example, if people say something that about them not loving something, we might assume that they hate it when they don't hate it, they're just indifferent. But we might be offended that they hate something, and we may get into an argument because we don't think that's right. And the other person really didn't mean any harm by it, but we kind of get into an argument about it. And then people might think we're rude because we argue too much, but it's because we have such black and white thinking. To comprehend the middle ground can be quite difficult for some people. Another reason in which people may perceive autistic people as rude, even though we don't mean to be, is that people may think that we are self-centered because in a conversation, I think most people expect you to ask follow-up questions. So if someone says that they met up with someone, they may be expecting you to ask, where did you meet up? If someone got something, like a product or something, they may expect you to ask, can I see it? An autistic person may not ask these things, and it's not because we don't care, it's just because it does not cross our mind to ask. We're just going to listen to what you're saying. It does not cross our mind to ask a lot of the time. And it's just later on we might think, oh, maybe I should have asked that. It's like that thing where people say maybe they thought of the perfect thing to say in an argument after an argument. We will just think of what we probably should have said in a conversation that we didn't say. With the whole follow-up question thing, it can be difficult to know what to ask, when to ask questions. There's so many unwritten social rules, like when do you speak? I mean, that's not something you're really told, it's just something that most people pick up automatically, but we don't. Another reason maybe that people might think we're rude, or not necessarily rude, but a reason that people may think that we may not value them as a friend is because we may come off a little bit awkward. But that might be because we just don't know how to interact. It doesn't come naturally to us, so we always feel like we're acting, and that can make us seem a little bit awkward. And people may take this personally and think that it's a sign that we don't really want to be friends with them or something, but it's not that. It's actually we do want to be friends with them. We're just trying to interact, and it's something that doesn't necessarily come very naturally to us. So if you know an autistic person and they seem a little bit awkward or socially aloof around you, please try not to take that personally, because it's not that the person doesn't value talking to you. The person probably really wants to talk to you, and it's not that they feel uncomfortable around you for you, it's just that they feel uncomfortable with socializing in general because it's a struggle, but they likely really do want to socialize, as they are putting in the effort to try and do it. Another reason why people may perceive us as rude is because we may struggle with two-way conversation. Either it's that we may not speak unless asked a question because we don't really know what we're supposed to say, we can't think of anything to talk about, or we don't really see the point in speaking because if it's not something someone needs, then they don't need to know, and if they do need to know, then they'll just ask a question. So we might just not really speak, so that won't really be a two-way conversation. And it could also be that we talk about ourselves too much and don't ask questions about others, and that isn't because that's definitely not because we think we're more important than others. It's not that. It's just that an autistic person may talk about themselves a lot because that's to them what social interaction is. People may not know what else to talk about, and people may completely forget that they may be expected to ask things about others as well, or someone might not really care what the answer would be to others' questions. With small talk, what a person answers may not be relevant to the autistic person, so they may not see the point in asking. But as an autistic person gets older, they may learn to ask because it's kindness and it shows the person that they care about them, even if the person doesn't think that the answer is really necessary. People can kind of learn to ask because it's kindness, and that's, you know, how things are done. It shows that you do actually care about the person. Wow. And, you know, sometimes that can be a struggle. People can be thought of as really self-absorbed when it's just certain questions like, what did you do today, may not be really relevant to us, so we don't feel the need to ask it, or that we just don't think to ask it because it just does not cross our mind and we're just speaking normally. Another reason in which autistic people may be judged as being rude is if someone doesn't actually speak all the time when they are expected to speak. But this definitely isn't rudeness. For example, some people with autism are semi-verbal, and semi-verbalism is where you sometimes may struggle to speak or may struggle to speak as much as usual. And people may perceive this as, you know, you're purposely not speaking or you're being stubborn, but it's not that at all. Sometimes people just can't speak. Also, there's selective mutism, which some people may have, which is an anxiety disorder where people literally just can't speak in certain social situations. And again, it's not a choice. Another thing is social anxiety and social phobia. Quite a few autistic people are very socially anxious. Hi, bitch. And that can that can make social situations really difficult. And it's worse when people say things like, oh, you need to get out more, why aren't you talking, are you ignoring me, you need to try harder. Things like that are actually really judgmental and really horrible, and you should never say that to an autistic person or someone dealing with anxiety. Some autistic people may sometimes feel too sad or overwhelmed to speak, so you shouldn't expect them to, as a person will then they need to rest, because if a person goes beyond their limits and doesn't conserve the little bit of social energy they have, they could have a meltdown or a shutdown. As well as this, some people may perceive an autistic person as penis, really withdrawn and quite antisocial. And people may feel that that means that the person's a bad friend and that they're purposely being rude and that they're purposely ignoring people. But it might not be that. It's probably unlikely to be that. Because autistic people sometimes are quite introverted. Although that's not every autistic person. There are lots of extroverted autistic people because autism affects everyone extremely, extremely differently. But for the autistic introverts, we may socialise hardly at all. It may seem like it's pointless to us. We don't necessarily get the same level of satisfaction as most people do when socialising, because that's just not how our brain works. Hi. For a lot of people, I think they get a lot of joy and a lot of feelings of connection from socialising. But for us, socialising, like small talk, might seem kind of pointless because we could use that time instead to research our special interests or work on something that helps others, or or learn something new, and we may avoid social situations due to that sort of thing, because socialising and just having small talk doesn't seem logical to us because it doesn't really add up to anything, it doesn't create anything, it does not have a sort of outcome. Saying that, however, there will be people that we are really close to who we do want to socialise with, but for some people that's a really small number of people. It's a close, solid circle of friends. But socialising for the sake of it and having small talk can be really difficult for autistic people, as we just don't think it's necessary. People may think that we're really rude and antisocial because we may cut off friendships if we feel that too much is expected of us. I think people in friendships may expect you to maybe meet up once a week or a couple of times a week and have lots of phone calls, but for an autistic person that can be an absolute nightmare, as we need a lot of time to recharge sometimes, and we just need time to ourselves to chill and to prevent us from getting overwhelmed. And the constant expectation of us to keep answering phone calls and keep going out of the house and seeing people can be draining, not because we're anxious and not because we're depressed, it's just because that's not how our brain works, and we'll be exceeding our natural capacity to socialise. And that's why autistic people may cut off friendships if they feel too much is expected of them, if a friendship is there's too much socialising involved, which turns out friendships require quite a bit of socialisation. But if it's a friend who doesn't do phone calls and we only meet up with like maybe once a month or something, we are more likely to be okay with it. If you think about it though, if you had to spend so much of your focus hiding your true self out of fear of judgment and trying to figure out what other people's intentions are and trying to read social cues that your brain does not automatically read, then you're going to be exhausted. So you can't blame us for needing some downtime, okay? And it isn't necessarily feeling drained in the sense of physical energy, it's just that no more socializing. Sometimes we do just need time to ourselves so that we can be happy, really. This isn't to say that autistic people don't want friends. We do, as I said. Sometimes people have a close circle of friends, but we just can't necessarily have too much social expectation on us. We often value friendships, and wow, it's not that we hate people. Definitely we don't hate people. Wow, we often really value the people in our lives. It's just we're not as social as others, and that's not our fault. Here's a bit of a penis. That's not what it is. Here's a bit of advice to autistic people here. If you're autistic, then don't feel ashamed of, declining phone calls if you need a break. Don't feel ashamed of going to the library when you're expected to go into the lunch hall at school or something. I mean, that was me just going to the library to avoid other people, not out of anxiety, just out of, I don't want to talk to people. I want to read something or do something on my phone instead. Don't feel ashamed of that, because sometimes that is what you need. And it isn't that we don't value our friends. We do value our friends. We just need a break sometimes. We value our friends a lot. Wow! But yeah, don't feel ashamed of taking a break if you need to, or declining something if you need to, because that's okay. You are conserving your social energy and letting yourself recharge when you need to, and you are doing what is best for you. You are doing what gives you the quality of life that you want, rather than what is expected of you, which may not even be what's good for you. Hi, bitch! Another reason in which people may think that autistic people are rude is because we might struggle to show empathy, and it isn't that we lack empathy. I think that's really important to say. There's a big thing that says autistic people lack empathy, but not necessarily, because there are actually a lot of really empathetic and compassionate autistic people, although empathy and compassion are very different things, but there are a lot of empathetic autistic people out there. Woo! What it is that either a person may struggle to identify whether someone is upset. So that might be because we struggle to read facial expressions, wow, and things like that. Or, wow, it might be that, hi, we logically know that someone is upset, someone is struggling, but we may not get the emotional feeling of that. Okay, technically that is a lack of empathy, but it's not a lack of compassion, because although someone else's feelings may not change our feelings, because they, to us, are separate from us, whereas most people will probably feel a change in emotion, mentally we still want to help them. We still don't like seeing people in pain. It's just a more of a mental process rather than an emotional process sometimes. So mentally, if someone's struggling, they'll think, oh my goodness, I need to help this person. What can I do to help them? We might not have the emotional aspect like most people do, though. But again, that's not the same for many autistic people. There are a lot of autistic people who are actually hyper-empathetic and will have a lot of the emotional aspect, but will struggle to have the mental process where they identify that someone is upset in the first place. So it can be different for different people. It could also be that someone can figure out whether someone's upset and that someone does feel empathy, but it could be that a person does not know how to show that empathy. So a person may be able to pick it up, or they may not be, and then they find out, and they may be able to feel empathy, but a person may not know what to say to someone when they're upset that would help them, and a person may not know how to act around someone who's upset. Not out of rudeness and not out of not caring, just out of not knowing. Another reason in which people may perceive us as rude is that, again, difficulty with social cues can mean that we may butt into people when they're speaking, and we don't mean to. We just don't necessarily know when it's our turn to speak, because sometimes it seems like people just talk continuously, and there's nowhere where we can really interject without interrupting them. It's very bizarre. This is something I found a lot. Like, non-autistic people seem to say their point without interjecting, but when we try and say it, we interject. I'm not really sure why. We just say things at the wrong times, because it just seems like people don't stop talking. They don't necessarily stop and wait for us to speak, because they don't know we want to speak. So it's very bizarre. But that's the reason that people may think we're rude, because we interject. We don't mean to interject. We're just trying to have a conversation, but we don't really know how. Okay? Cut us some slack. Another reason in which people may perceive us as rude, this is going on, is that we may speak really loudly. And again, we don't mean this, we just don't have volume control. I feel like most people have a typical level that they speak at, and it's not really loud. But for us, we aren't always aware that we're speaking too quietly or too loudly. So sometimes we might seem like we're shouting, especially if we're really excited, and people may think that's quite rude that we're talking so loudly and talking over people, but we don't mean it. We just don't even realize that we're speaking loudly most of the time. Again, in relation to the difficulty reading social cues, we may not know when to say thank you if someone does something for us. Like sometimes we say thank you, sometimes we might not know if we're supposed to. So people might take us as rude. We may not always think to hold the door open for someone else. These are all things we learn, but they don't come automatically to us. We have to keep them in mind. Wow, and we do. Often as autistic people grow older, we learn these things and we will open doors for people because we want to be kind. We will, say thank you. We will ask people how they are. It's simply that it doesn't come naturally to us like it does for most people, and that can sometimes be perceived as we're really rude and self-absorbed, but we do not mean it. We really don't mean it. We want to help others. We want to be with others. We want to be nice to others. It's just sometimes we don't realise that what we're doing isn't great. Another reason in which people may perceive us as rude is because we might keep talking about something and not realising that people aren't interested because we can't pick up on hints or social cues, or we can't see necessarily whether someone's bored. And people may think we're rude for continuing to do something after they've hinted that we shouldn't be doing it, but we don't pick up on those hints, so it's kind of pointless to hint to us. You need to tell us directly, which I understand can be difficult, but I think it is helpful to tell us stuff directly so that we actually know that you don't want us to be doing that, because we probably aren't going to pick up on the hint. This is something that people may not necessarily see us as rude because of, but people may think that we're disinterested in them, and people, again, they may take it personally, but it's nothing personal. People may think at times that we are disinterested in their friendship or something because our facial expressions might seem a bit flat sometimes. Again, this isn't the same for everyone. As you can see, I'm usually quite animated, but some people do have this where if they're spoken to, or if someone tells a joke, a person may be quite flat. They may not laugh, they may not really smile. I mean, I have episodes of this, but it's definitely not constant. I'm usually very expressive, but I mean, when it does happen, people are usually somewhat offended. They think that you're unimpressed with them, unexcited, or don't like being with them, when it's not that. It's just that our facial expressions are just sometimes very flat because, again, it's something that might not necessarily come as naturally to us. And with the jokes part as well, it depends on the joke, but some autistic people don't understand jokes. That was something that was brought up quite a bit in my autism assessment, or saying that autistic people don't always understand certain jokes. But yeah, it's not necessarily that you are unentertaining, it's not that you're boring, it's just that we don't necessarily get the joke that you've just told if you've told us a joke, or we don't understand what's funny. We might be so serious and take things so literally that we don't understand why what you've said is funny. Another thing that people may judge us for and think we're rude for is meltdowns, and meltdowns are definitely not rudeness, you know. Meltdowns are when someone is really overstimulated, really upset, really agitated, really, stressed, that we might become violent, or we might cry, or we might yell, and people may think we're immature, which we're not. We can't control it. People may think that we're ruining their day, when that's not a really nice thing to say, because we don't choose to be in that distress. So it's something that's ruining our day, but why is it ruining yours? Why are you saying we are ruining your day because we can't control it? People may think that us having meltdowns is extremely rude, but we can't control it. It's a sign of distress and that we need help and not judgment. So if you are around an autistic person who is having a meltdown, please do not judge them for being immature. It's a part of their struggle, and it's uncontrollable. If someone's having a meltdown, help them, ask them how you can help, and don't judge, just be there for them. Oh dear, there's another thing. Another thing that people may be judged for is potentially anxiety causing agitation. I only say this because sometimes when people are anxious, they can get a little bit snappy, and this can appear quite rude, but it might just be because a person is so overwhelmed that they really struggle to be unreactive. They really struggle to respond rather than react. They really struggle to do it in any other way. And a person may not know how to get out of this because they may be anxious most of the time. They may feel very pressured most of the time. So it's very difficult for someone not to be like that. And people may assume that they're a really rude person when it's actually someone who needs someone to talk to and connect with and to listen to them rather than be judged again, because in that case it's likely that person doesn't want to be reacting that way. It's kind of something that happens automatically for them, and they need their nervous system really calmed, and they need the overwhelm to decrease, they need the overstimulation to decrease, so that they can be themselves again and be their happy selves who isn't reacting to everything and isn't so agitated. It's not that we're trying to be rude. Autistic people often have issues with tone of voice. That is another non-verbal social interaction thingy. But because we have issues with tone of voice, sometimes we'll have a tone of voice that some people think is really rude, but we don't see how it's rude. We're just speaking normally, and people just think we're rude for it. But it's because we don't really know what the tone of voice we are doing is hinting, if it's hinting anything. Wow! Another thing is that we may not know what is appropriate and what is inappropriate to say. This comes into the brutal honesty thing as well, but in a social situation, we might not have any clue that we're not supposed to say something that we say. It just doesn't make sense to us. We don't understand why something is offensive, or how something will be perceived by others. It can really be difficult at times to know how something we say will affect others when we say it with good intentions, and then it upsets someone. We wonder why. It can be very, very bizarre. I remember a time where someone was saying to me that they think someone they know is autistic because they reacted in the wrong way to when they were upset. They said something that wasn't very nice, but as an autistic person myself, I didn't understand why what the other person said wasn't nice. So it can be really strange sometimes. We don't know certain things, but I have to say that autism is not an excuse for like purposely being rude. Like, all the things I'm saying now are really unintentional, most of them. I think pretty much all of them, they're unintentional. So, if you are an autistic person, saying that you do stuff because you're autistic, but you're actually doing it on purpose, then that isn't great. However, I do want to say that at the same time, we may sometimes judge ourselves for it, and we might feel like we're doing it on purpose, but you're probably actually not. If you ever feel like bad for it, or guilt for it, or confused about it, then I can tell you that you're not doing it on purpose. But what I'm trying to say is, sadly, not everyone out there is good. There's got to be some autistic people, like there are neurotypical people, who probably do use their autism as an excuse, but I don't think that happens very often. I think that's extremely, extremely, extremely rare. So if there is an autistic person who is saying to you that they're really sorry for doing something they didn't realise because they're autistic, then definitely forgive them, because they are apologising. They are holding themselves accountable even though they can't control it. So you need to be really understanding towards the person. So yeah, that's really important. Be understanding. Almost like for the majority of the time when autistic people seem rude and are perceived as rude, it's unintentional. We don't mean it. It's something that we're struggling with. It's something that we can't control, or it's something that we just don't understand. Like, example, we don't understand social cues. So I think it really is important to be understanding and patient with us, and maybe give us time to explain ourselves, potentially, in terms of the opinion thing. If we say something, like an opinion that you deem really offensive, give us time to explain it, because once you see our point of view, you might see that that's the only point of view we see. So to us, it makes complete sense that we might view things that way, when to another person it seems really bad, but we only necessarily see it from our own perspective at times. Another thing that autistic people may be judged for is, again, because we struggle to see other people's point of view, we may be our own point of reference. So if someone says something that they've been experiencing or that they're going through, instead of replying with, oh no, that must be really difficult for you, how can I help? We might reply with a story about ourselves that's quite similar. And that might seem really self-centered, but again, it's unintentional. We don't realize that we might not really meant to, we might not realize that we aren't meant to be doing that. We might just think that we're trying to connect with someone, we're trying to relate with someone, we're trying to help someone feel like they're not alone, but other people may view us as really self-centered when we're actually just trying to help. Another thing is we may, again, relate things that are seemingly unrelated to our own experiences in an attempt to understand and connect. For example, this is just my own experience. The other day, someone was saying something about something that opens the blood-brain barrier, and then I was like, oh, strep can do that in people with PANDAS. Repeated strep infections can open the blood-brain barrier. And again, that probably seems really self-centered when I'm using myself as a point of reference, but that's all I know, so that's all I really say. I mean, maybe it seems quite bad that we relate everything to ourselves sometimes, but again, it's not intentional. We don't want to be self-centered. We don't think we're better than anyone. We don't think we're more important than anyone. It's just how we socialize. It's just that, you know, the first thought that comes to our mind is, oh, I experienced something like that, so that's why we say it. And we might just be trying to understand, we might just be trying to connect with someone. I hope that by watching this you gained more understanding of what things are like from an autistic person's perspective, but please, please, please remember that every single autistic person is different, and the points I made in this video definitely will not apply to every autistic person. And wow, there is a lot of diversity in the autistic community. So again, with the introversion thing I said, not everyone is like that. Some autistic people are very, very extroverted. Wow, and some autistic people may call people, like phone people up in a way that others perceive as too much. So it may be the opposite. It may be that an autistic person may be too social in the eyes of others, and maybe that makes other people uncomfortable, and maybe it makes other people feel like they need a break and things like that. And so, you know, it can go different ways. Some autistic people are highly social and may not understand that they're socializing a bit too much, or maybe disrespecting boundaries. They're doing it unintentionally, they don't realize it, so it's not really disrespecting, it's more that they just don't see other people's boundaries. Or it can be the other way around. Someone might be like really introverted and be upset that people keep expecting them to socialize when they need to rest, things like that. And again, wow, chicken, with the wow point of reference thing, not everyone's going to do that. Wow, some people will, some people won't. As I said, over time we often learn like how to interact. We learn that some of the things aren't that great. Like, you know, in this video I'm autistic and I've been saying examples of what is expected and what's not expected. I sometimes try to do what's expected. So now I will ask people about themselves more. I will, wow, keep certain things in mind and then follow that as like a rule in my mind.